The smell of lighter fluid mixing with amplifier heat. The sound of a Stratocaster screaming feedback through Marshall stacks pushed past their limits. The sight of flames beginning to curl around maple and rosewood, transforming an instrument into a funeral pyre. And 90,000 people watching in absolute silence as a guitarist they'd never heard of before that afternoon committed an act of destruction so complete, so deliberate, so visually and symbolically perfect that it would define rock and roll rebellion for every generation that followed. But what those 90,000 people didn't know, what almost nobody knew as Jimi Hendrix knelt on that Monterey stage with lighter fluid in one hand and a wooden match in the other, was that the company who built that guitar, the Fender Corporation whose name was painted across the headstock that would burn first, had refused to give him an endorsement deal just 8 weeks earlier, had looked at this unknown guitarist with his wild hair and wilder playing style and decided he wasn't the kind of musician they wanted representing their brand, had chosen to keep their endorsement roster limited to jazz players and country artists and surf rock instrumentalists, keeping their image clean and their market positioning safe and their guitars associated with professionalism rather than with whatever dangerous energy this Hendrix character seemed to represent. The irony that would become apparent only later, only after the flames were extinguished and the photographs were developed and the image began its journey toward becoming one of rock's most iconic moments, was that Fender's refusal to sponsor Jimi Hendrix would cost them nothing and gain them everything. That the burning would create an association between their guitars and rock rebellion so powerful that it would transform their entire market position. That their rejection would lead directly to the moment that made their Stratocaster the definitive rock guitar for the next 50 years. Before we step into that Monterey afternoon when refusal became immortality and destruction became the most effective endorsement imaginable, hit subscribe because what follows comes from the business executives who made the rejection, from the musicians who watched the burning, from the photographers who captured it, and from the Fender employees who had to decide how to respond when the guitar they wouldn't sponsor became the most famous instrument in rock history. Early 1967. Jimi Hendrix has been in London for approximately 6 months, having arrived in September 1966 as a virtually unknown session guitarist and sideman with regional experience, but no significant recognition or following. His transformation from obscurity to phenomenon happens with remarkable speed. Chas Chandler, former bassist for The Animals, discovers Jimi playing in a New York club and immediately recognizes something extraordinary in both his playing and his stage presence, convincing Jimi to come to London, where Chandler believes the British music scene will be more receptive to Jimi's experimental approach than America's more conservative audiences. The strategy proves immediately successful. Within weeks of arriving in London, Jimi is playing club shows that attract attention from established musicians, including members of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Cream. The Jimi Hendrix Experience forms with Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums, and their combination of blues foundation with psychedelic experimentation and sheer volume creates something that London's music scene hasn't encountered before. By early 1967, The Experience has released their first single, Hey Joe, which reaches number 6 on UK charts, and their reputation for explosive live performances is spreading through the tight network of musicians and industry professionals who shape popular music's direction. But success in London clubs and on UK charts doesn't automatically translate to recognition in America, particularly in California, where the music industry's commercial infrastructure is concentrated. Jimi remains virtually unknown in the United States despite his London success, his name meaning nothing to American audiences, or to the record executives and booking agents and equipment manufacturers who control access to American markets and mass media exposure. This creates both opportunity and challenge. Opportunity because Jimi's London success proves his commercial viability and artistic legitimacy. Challenge because breaking into American markets requires different strategies and different connections than what worked in London's more intimate music scene. The Monterey International Pop Festival, being organized for June 1967, represents a crucial opportunity for artists trying to reach American audiences. The festival is being positioned as something unprecedented in scale and ambition, bringing together established acts and emerging artists for 3 days of performances that will be filmed and recorded, documented for posterity and for commercial release. The festival's organizers include important industry figures including John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas and producer Lou Adler, people whose credibility and connections can provide legitimacy and exposure to artists who perform successfully. Chaz Chandler and Jimmy's management recognized that Monterey could be transformative for Jimmy's American career, that a successful performance there could accomplish in one afternoon what might otherwise take years of touring and radio promotion. But getting invited to perform requires lobbying and advocacy from people whose opinions the organizers respect. Paul McCartney, who has seen Jimmy perform in London and recognizes his extraordinary abilities, recommends Jimmy to the Monterey organizers, providing the credibility necessary for an unknown artist to be added to a lineup that already includes major acts like Otis Redding, Janis Joplin, and The Who. The invitation comes through, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience is scheduled to perform on Sunday, June 18th, the festival's final day. The months between securing the Monterey invitation and the actual festival date involve intense preparation and strategic planning about how to make maximum impact with a single performance before an audience that has never heard of Jimmy and has no context for understanding what makes his playing significant or revolutionary. The challenge isn't just performing well, but performing in a way that creates memorable moments that will survive the festival's conclusion, that will generate photographs and stories and discussions that extend Jimmy's reach beyond the 90,000 people physically present. This is where equipment endorsements become relevant to the strategic planning. Professional musicians in 1967 typically have sponsorship relationships with instrument and amplifier manufacturers, receiving free or discounted equipment in exchange for using and being photographed with specific brands, creating associations between those brands and successful artists that serve marketing purposes. These endorsements provide mutual benefit. Musicians get reliable equipment without financial investment. Manufacturers get credibility and visibility through association with respected artists. Jimmy's management approaches multiple equipment manufacturers about potential endorsement deals as part of preparing for Monterey and for the American touring that would hopefully follow successful performance there. The logic is straightforward. If Jimmy is going to achieve the visibility and success they're anticipating, having endorsement relationships established beforehand positions him professionally and provides financial support for equipment costs that would otherwise have to be covered from performance fees and record sales that haven't materialized yet. Fender Musical Instruments Corporation in early 1967 is the dominant force in electric guitar manufacturing, having pioneered solid-body electric guitars in the 1950s and established the Stratocaster and Telecaster as industry standards. Their endorsement roster includes successful and respected musicians, primarily jazz players like George Benson, country artists like James Burton, and surf instrumentalists like Dick Dale. The common thread among Fender's endorsed artists is professionalism and technical facility. Musicians who demonstrate that Fender guitars can produce sophisticated music in capable hands, who represent the company's image of quality craftsmanship serving serious musical purposes. When Jimmy's management contacts Fender about a potential endorsement deal, the response is polite but firm refusal. The reasons given aren't fully documented, but multiple sources suggest that Fender's concerns centered on image and market positioning rather than on doubts about Jimmy's playing abilities. Fender sees their brand as associated with professional musicianship and technical excellence, with guitars that serve the music rather than overwhelming it. The reports they're hearing about Jimmy's stage show, the descriptions of playing guitar with his teeth and behind his back, the emphasis on volume and distortion and visual spectacle rather than on clean tone and melodic clarity, doesn't align with the image Fender wants to project or the market segments they're targeting. There's also likely an element of risk assessment in Fender's decision. Jimmy is unknown in America, his commercial viability unproven in the market that matters most to an American manufacturer. Endorsing established artists makes business sense because their success is documented and their fan base is quantifiable. Endorsing an unknown artist represents speculation on future success that might never materialize, and if Jimmy's American career fails to launch, Fender gains nothing from the endorsement relationship. The refusal doesn't prevent Jimmy from using Fender guitars. He can purchase them or use guitars provided by his management or record label, and the Stratocaster's design and sound characteristics make it well suited to his playing style despite Fender's lack of interest in endorsing him. But the refusal means Jimmy doesn't receive the financial support or official recognition that endorsement would provide, doesn't get listed in Fender's marketing materials or included in their artist roster, remains categorized by the company as just another customer rather than as someone whose success could enhance their brand value. Multiple other equipment manufacturers also decline endorsement relationships with Jimmy in this period. making similar calculations about risk and image and market positioning. The rejections aren't personal or hostile, just business decisions made by companies protecting their brands and making conservative choices about who to associate their products with. But cumulatively, the rejections mean Jimmy approaches Monterey without the industry support structure that established artists take for granted, without the legitimacy that corporate endorsements provide, still positioned as an outsider despite his London success.
The preparations for Monterey involve practical and strategic decisions about what to play and how to perform in ways that will create maximum impact with an audience encountering Jimmy for the first time. The set list needs to demonstrate Jimmy's range and abilities while building toward moments of intensity that create memorable peaks.
The visual performance needs to complement rather than distract from the music, enhancing the experience rather than substituting spectacle for substance. And everything needs to fit within the approximately 30-minute time slot that festival performers are allocated, requiring compression and focus rather than the extended improvisation that club shows might allow. The Who are scheduled to perform immediately before the Jimi Hendrix Experience on Sunday afternoon, and their performance climaxes with Pete Townshend smashing his guitar in an act of theatrical destruction that's become part of The Who's standard stage show. This creates both problem and opportunity for Jimmy. Problem because following a guitar-smashing finale with conventional performance might seem anticlimactic, might fail to maintain the energy and intensity that The Who have created. Opportunity because if Jimmy can match or exceed The Who's destructive gesture while giving it different meaning or greater visual impact, he can turn Townshend's moment into setup for his own climax, rather than being overshadowed by it. The decision to burn the guitar emerges from discussions between Jimmy and his management about how to conclude the Monterey performance in a way that creates an indelible image, that gives photographers and filmmakers something visually striking to capture, that provides a symbolic gesture matching the intensity of the music itself. The idea isn't entirely original. Jimmy has occasionally damaged guitars during performances, though not systematically or with the deliberate ritualism that the Monterey burning would involve. But burning rather than just smashing offers different symbolic resonances. Destruction through fire suggesting sacrifice and purification, and transformation rather than simple violence or frustration. There are practical concerns about whether the burning will work as intended, whether the guitar will actually ignite or just smolder ineffectively, whether the visual result will be dramatic enough to justify the risk and expense of destroying an expensive instrument. Lighter fluid is acquired to ensure the wood catches fire quickly and burns visibly. The performance finale is rehearsed conceptually, though obviously not with actual flames, ensuring that Jimmy and the band understand the timing and staging that will make the gesture work theatrically. June 18, 1967, the Monterey County Fairgrounds. Afternoon becoming early evening, the festival's final day. Approximately 90,000 people spread across the grounds, some positioned close to the stage, others hundreds of yards back on the hillsides surrounding the performance area. The crowd has watched performances by Otis Redding, Janis Joplin, The Grateful Dead, The Who, and dozens of other acts across 3 days, has experienced both transcendent music and forgettable sets, has developed the kind of exhausted euphoria that comes from sustained immersion in sounds and crowds in the California June heat. The vast majority of people present have never heard of Jimi Hendrix. His name means nothing to them. His London success is unknown. His abilities are unproven in their experience. When the announcement comes that the Jimi Hendrix Experience is next, the response is curiosity rather than excitement, mild interest rather than anticipation. The crowd doesn't know what to expect, has no framework for understanding what's about to happen, approaches the performance without prejudice but also without particular investment in whether it succeeds or fails. Jimmy walks onto the stage wearing bright clothing that immediately establishes visual impact, his appearance suggesting someone who doesn't conform to conventional rock musician aesthetics, whose presentation is as carefully considered as his music. The Stratocaster is white, clean, beautiful in the afternoon light, its curves and contours designed for both visual appeal and ergonomic functionality. Jimmy straps it on, faces the amplifiers that have been positioned and tested and adjusted to produce maximum volume and minimum feedback unless feedback is specifically desired. The opening of Killing Floor announces immediately that something unusual is happening. The volume is extreme beyond what the crowd has heard from any previous performer, the sound physically impactful in ways that demand attention rather than allowing passive listening. Jimmy's playing combines technical facility with raw aggression, demonstrating both that he can play with precision and that precision serves expression rather than existing as end in itself. The crowd's body language begins changing as the music continues, attention focusing, excitement building, recognition spreading that what they're witnessing is genuinely extraordinary rather than just competent performance. The set progresses through Foxy Lady, Like a Rolling Stone, Rock Me Baby, each song demonstrating different aspects of Jimmy's range and approach, each building intensity toward the conclusion that's been planned but that the audience doesn't anticipate. Between songs, Jimmy's stage presence becomes more theatrical, his movements and gestures suggesting someone channeling energy rather than just performing choreographed routines, someone genuinely possessed by the music's intensity rather than manufacturing emotion for audience consumption. Wild Thing begins. The song is simple, almost primitive in its structure, built on basic chord progressions that thousands of garage bands have played. But what Jimmy does with these simple materials transforms them into something beyond the song itself. Using Wild Thing as a framework for improvisation and sonic experimentation that demonstrates how imagination and technique can transcend limitations of structure or composition. The guitar begins producing sounds that seem impossible. Feedback controlled and shaped into melodic phrases, distortion serving musical purposes rather than just adding aggression. The whole performance suggesting that boundaries between noise and music are flexible rather than fixed. As Wild Thing builds toward its conclusion, Jimmy's playing becomes increasingly physical and theatrical. He plays behind his back, demonstrating both technical facility and showmanship, turning difficulty into performance spectacle. He plays with his teeth, an image that photographers capture and that will become iconic, representing both virtuosity and rebellion, both mastery and transgression. The crowd is fully engaged now, the initial curiosity transformed into genuine excitement, recognition that they're witnessing something historically significant, even if they can't yet articulate why it feels that way. And then the music stops. But Jimmy doesn't leave the stage. Instead, he kneels in front of the amplifier stack, the Stratocaster positioned in front of him. The crowd grows quiet, unsure what's happening, sensing something significant is about to occur, but not knowing what form it will take. Jimmy produces a can of lighter fluid from somewhere backstage and begins spraying the guitar's body, the liquid visible as it soaks into the white finish, darkening the wood and creating patterns of saturation. The moments before ignition feel suspended, time stretching as the crowd processes what they're seeing and begins to understand what it means. Jimmy is going to burn the guitar, not just damage it or create theatrical destruction, but actually set it on fire, commit an act of ritualistic destruction that transforms the instrument from functional tool into sacrificial offering. The match ignites. Jimmy holds it to the lighter fluid-soaked wood. For a moment, nothing happens. The match flame too small to overcome the guitar's resistance to combustion. Then the fluid catches, and fire spreads across the Stratocaster's surface with surprising speed, flames curling around the curves, following the liquid's patterns, consuming the finish and beginning to char the wood beneath. The crowd's response is complex and conflicted. Some people scream in excitement or shock. Others watch in silence, processing the symbolic resonances of what they're witnessing. The photographers move closer, recognizing that they're capturing something genuinely significant. Their shutters clicking repeatedly as the flames grow and change and consume more of the instrument. The filmmakers adjust their cameras to ensure proper exposure and focus, documenting destruction that will be studied and analyzed for decades. Jimmy doesn't just light the guitar and walk away. He remains engaged with it, manipulating the burning instrument, lifting it and smashing it back down to fragment the wood and spread the flames, creating visual dynamism rather than just static burning. The performance continues even without musical sound, Jimmy's movements and the fire's progression creating spectacle that holds attention and builds intensity toward final destruction. The Stratocaster doesn't burn completely or quickly. Wood resists combustion, particularly the dense hardwoods used in guitar construction, but the fire damages the guitar beyond any possibility of repair, warping the neck, destroying the electronics, reducing what had been a beautiful and functional instrument to charred fragments and twisted metal. When Jimmy finally stands and leaves the stage, the remains are gathered by roadies and carried off, pieces of burned wood and melted components that represent both ending and transformation. The immediate aftermath at Monterey involves people trying to process what they've witnessed, and to articulate its significance. Musicians backstage discuss the performance's intensity and the burning's symbolic power, some impressed and others disturbed by the destructive gesture. Audience members debate whether the burning was artistic statement or cheap theatrical stunt, whether it enhanced or detracted from the music that preceded it. The journalists and critics present begin formulating the descriptions and analyses that will introduce Jimi to wider American audiences, trying to capture in words an experience that fundamentally exceeded verbal explanation. The photographs taken during the burning begin their circulation immediately, appearing in newspapers and magazines covering the festival, providing visual evidence of the performance that those who weren't present can't quite believe based on descriptions alone. The images are striking and unsettling, showing a young black guitarist kneeling before a burning instrument, flames creating patterns of light and shadow, the moment suggesting both destruction and creation, both violence and ritual, both ending and beginning. At Fender headquarters in Fullerton, California, the news of the Monterey burning reaches executives and marketing staff who had declined Jimi's endorsement request just weeks earlier. The initial response is likely dismay or concern, worry that their guitar being burned on stage might create negative associations, might suggest that Fender instruments are disposable, or that guitarists feel hostile toward the company's products. But as the photographs circulate and the media coverage develops and the cultural impact becomes apparent, the concern transforms into recognition of opportunity. What Fender's executives begin to realize is that the burning has created exactly the kind of association with rock rebellion and youth culture that they couldn't have purchased through conventional marketing or endorsement relationships. The image of the burning Stratocaster becomes inseparable from Monterey's significance as a cultural moment, from the performance's revolutionary impact, from Jimi's emergence as one of rock's most important artists. And because the burned guitar was identifiably a Fender Stratocaster, because the headstock with its logo remained visible even as flames consumed the body, because the guitar's distinctive shape was recognizable throughout the destruction, the burning creates powerful visual association between Fender instruments and rock music's most dangerous and exciting possibilities. The decision Fender faces is whether to respond to the burning with legal action or moral condemnation, treating it as vandalism or disrespect toward their products, or whether to embrace the association and use the burning as marketing opportunity. The choice they make is brilliant in its pragmatism and its recognition of cultural shift. Rather than condemning the burning or distancing themselves from it, Fender begins incorporating the burning imagery into their marketing and advertising, using photographs from Monterey to position Stratocasters as the guitar of choice for rock's most innovative and rebellious artists. The company reaches out to Jimi's management about establishing the endorsement relationship they'd previously declined, offering free guitars and amplifiers, proposing to feature Jimi prominently in their advertising, essentially reversing their earlier judgment based on the recognition that the burning had created value for their brand that no conventional endorsement could match. Jimi's management, recognizing both the practical benefits of the endorsement and the irony of Fender wanting him now, negotiates terms that provide Jimi with equipment and compensation while preserving his independence and image. The endorsement relationship that develops between Jimi and Fender after Monterey becomes mutually beneficial in ways that neither party could have anticipated before the burning. Jimi gets reliable equipment and financial support. Fender gets association with rock's most innovative guitarist and with the Monterey moment that defined an entire cultural era. The Stratocaster becomes definitively established as rock guitar rather than just as jazz or country instrument, its market position transformed by association with Jimi's playing and image, and with the burning that turned refusal into endorsement and destruction into creation. The irony that makes this story legendary rather than just interesting is how completely Fender's initial judgment proved wrong, and how thoroughly the burning vindicated their rejection. If Fender had endorsed Jimi before Monterey, the burning would have been awkward, requiring the company to respond to their endorsed artist destroying their product. But because they'd refused endorsement, the burning carried no obligation, created no conflict, allowed Fender to benefit from the association without having to explain or justify the destruction. Their refusal positioned them perfectly to capitalize on the burning's impact without bearing any responsibility for it. The guitar that burned at Monterey becomes one of rock's most valuable artifacts, despite being reduced to charred fragments. The remains are eventually gathered and pieces distributed to various collectors and museums, each fragment treated as relic from a founding moment of rock culture. Some pieces are mounted and displayed, Others kept in private collections, all valued not for functionality, but for connection to the moment when destruction became creation and refusal became endorsement. Musicians who witnessed the burning speak about it in interviews decades later, describing its impact and what it represented about rock music's possibilities in 1967. They talk about the courage required to destroy something valuable in service of artistic statement, about the symbolic power of fire and transformation, about how the burning changed their understanding of what performance could mean and accomplish. Some admit they thought it was excessive or gimmicky at the time, but came to recognize its importance as their perspective matured, and they understood better what Jimi was attempting and achieving. Fender's transformation from refusing Jimi's endorsement to building their brand identity around his image, and the burning's iconography represents one of marketing's most successful pivots and one of corporate culture's most honest admissions of initial misjudgment. The company never hid their earlier refusal or pretended they'd always recognized Jimi's significance. Instead, they acknowledged publicly that the burning changed their understanding of their own products and their market, that what they'd initially seen as incompatible with their brand became definitional of what their brand could mean to new generations of musicians and audiences. The Monterey burning established patterns that countless rock guitarists would imitate in subsequent decades, guitar destruction becoming standard theatrical gesture for artists trying to signal rebellion or intensity or indifference to material possessions. But the imitations never quite captured what made Jimi's burning significant. The difference was that Jimi's burning wasn't just destruction, but was transformation, wasn't just theatrical gesture, but was genuine artistic statement, wasn't just breaking something, but was creating through breaking, using fire to purify and to transcend, and to announce that boundaries could be burned away as easily as varnish and wood. When Jimi died in September 1970, Fender's public statements acknowledged not just his playing abilities, but specifically referenced Monterey and the burning, recognizing that moment as having transformed both Jimi's career and their company's identity. The Stratocaster he burned was mentioned prominently in obituaries and retrospectives, treated as artifact of historical importance comparable to instruments preserved in museums for their association with classical composers or jazz legends. Fender continues to reference the Monterey burning in marketing and advertising, using the imagery and the story to connect their contemporary products to rock history and to position Stratocasters as instruments that enable rather than constrain artistic vision. The burning has become part of Fender's corporate mythology, the moment when their conservative market positioning gave way to association with rock's most radical possibilities, when refusal transformed into opportunity, when saying no to endorsement led directly to receiving the most effective endorsement imaginable. The burned Stratocaster represents the only endorsement that matters in rock culture, the endorsement that comes not from corporate marketing departments, but from artists doing something so significant with an instrument that the instrument becomes inseparable from the moment and the meaning. Fender couldn't have purchased this association or created it through conventional advertising. They could only receive it as gift from an artist whose vision exceeded their initial understanding and whose destruction created value that their refusal had made possible. When you see photographs of the Monterey burning, when you watch the footage that captures Jimi kneeling before the flames with 90,000 people watching in stunned recognition, you're witnessing the moment when refusal became endorsement and destruction became creation. When a company's conservative judgment about risk and image proved exactly wrong in exactly the right way, positioning them to benefit from an association they declined to create. When burning wood and melting electronics and charred fragments became more valuable than any intact instrument could ever be, because what burned wasn't just a guitar, but was the boundary between refusal and acceptance, between destruction and creation, between saying no and being answered with flames that said yes more powerfully than any contract or endorsement agreement could ever articulate. The white Stratocaster that Fender wouldn't sponsor burned at Monterey and became legendary. And Fender, who had refused to associate their brand with the guitarist who burned it, spent the next 50 years building their identity around that burning, around that refusal, transformed into the most powerful endorsement in rock history. The irony is perfect. The lesson is permanent. Sometimes saying no positions you perfectly to receive yes. Sometimes refusal becomes opportunity. Sometimes the guitar you wouldn't sponsor burns and makes your name immortal.